Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbart Gaming. You know, since I've never shown any Game Boy games on this channel, you might think that I hate the Game Boy.
Oh, you're wrong!
Actually, I like the thing, and there are quite a few games that are really good for it. And today, we're going to take a look at one that's kinda surprising in a special episode of How About That. What's special about it? Nothing other than it's my last video of the year 2023. So we're going to take a look today at Contra The Alien Wars, which was released in the US in October of 1994 and is a European-developed game handled by Factor 5, who made a lot of games that you probably know that I'll talk about during the gameplay commentary. But you know what? I'm not going to waste any more of your time today. Let's just jump right into it, shall we? Right away, we can see this was developed by Factor 5. If you don't know them, they made the Turrican games on home computers and also the Rogue Squadron games on the N64 and GameCube. So Factor 5, pretty good pedigree to make an 8-bit action game. You can see we've got some of the opening cinematic from the Super Nintendo game. They've even got the nice little wavy effect on the buildings. But I've got to admit, the people here do look a little janky. Although that was a nice little semi-faux parallax effect in moving the head around, wasn't it? Okay, so you'll notice there's no Contra III in here, it's just Contra The Alien Wars. But yeah, it's Contra III. So as you can see, I mean, visually they did a pretty nice job on this. Of course, on an actual Game Boy, you'd be seeing it all green, but that's disgusting, so let's take a look at it this way instead. Now, there are a few changes to the gameplay that were made here, and I want to call those out. So you'll notice I've got the spread gun right now. It only shoots 2 bursts of 3 instead of 5. You can only have 1 weapon at a time on this. You can't have 2 and switch between them. Aside from that, you also can't hold, obviously, any trigger button to stand still and aim. So you can't lock yourself into position while aiming on any angle. So aside from that, almost everything is in here. The only thing that's missing as far as weapons go is the laser, which I never really liked all that much anyway. And yeah, that's it. Pretty much everything else is here. Even the bombs are here, but they don't do the same thing visually that they do on the Super Nintendo original, of course. And here's our barrier. Now here's our first thing that's cut. The tank isn't there. That should be there on the SNES version. But we do have the plane swoop in and fire those missiles out and light the entire ground ablaze. No fancy mode 7, just some good old-fashioned tile manipulation. And if you didn't notice it, they had a little subtle intro of the clouds up top for the parallax. The fire effect is not super great. It looks better on a Game Boy screen than it does, you know, on a computer screen during emulation like this. It would look almost transparent on a real screen, but not quite. And as we get up to our first boss here, you'll see that he is surprisingly pretty visually intact. And there's our giant turtle dinosaur thing, I forget his name, don't really care. Now he is missing some of his attacks, and he's missing the weird, off-putting sort of mosaic-like animation that happens on him in the SNES original. So this version of Contra The Alien Wars is considerably easier than the Super Nintendo original, and just wait till you see what I do once I get the flamethrower. The flamethrower in this game is sort of your god-tier weapon. Now I bet you weren't expecting this. Game Boy Contra The Alien Wars even has the overhead levels from Super Nintendo Contra III The Alien Wars. Now they are a little bit different. While the layout's generally the same, they don't rotate. In the Super Nintendo original, these were Mode 7 levels, where the entire background could be rotated left or right at will. In the Game Boy version here, there is no rotation at all. We're missing a few enemy types, we're missing a few fire types. The little base guys don't have quite the same attack patterns. And also, you can't lay on the ground to let bullets pass overhead in this one, like you can in the Super Nintendo original. So quite a few things have been cut, But, I mean, quite a few things are also here. And I think it's good that they included this level, and they even have the second one, too. And you can see I've got the flamethrower weapon here. The flamethrower in this version of Contra 3 is the god tier weapon of this game. It just melts all the bosses. Once you have this, there's no reason to get anything else. So once you've got the flamethrower, you basically just want to try to hold on to it for the whole rest of the game. If you're a Contra purist like me, you may want to get that spread gun and try and hold on to that forever. But the flamethrower is way better for all bosses. There's nothing that the spread gun is better for in this game. Take my word for it. But here is our boss on this level. You can see, I mean, it looks like the one from the original SNES game, but its attack pattern and movement is a bit different. It also doesn't jump up in the air and try and crash down on top of you. That was a little too much of an ask for the little Game Boy here, but still, it looks good. It's got an interesting enough pattern. You go in there with that flamethrower, you will get to just utterly melt that boss. And here's our third stage. And sure, we're missing the parallax and the super detailed backgrounds that we had in the Super Nintendo original. We do at least have a little faux parallax with the split-screen clouds going on at the top of the screen there. I used that a few times throughout this game, and it's to pretty good effect. We're missing some enemies and some other stuff here, but again, all to be expected. I mean, there are going to be sacrifices for this version of the game. While I recently showed, the arcade and Genesis versions of Galaxy Force 2 to see a game that suffered from a lot of cutbacks, this is kind of the opposite. This game has a lot of cutbacks, but it still retains enough of the gameplay from the original that it's still a lot of fun. Some people may actually even prefer this Game Boy version of Contra 3, believe it or not, because it's so much easier than the Super Nintendo game. So if you're new to Contra 3 especially, and you want to try it out and get used to it, you might be better off working with this one first before moving to the SNES game. And one thing I will mention as we've got a few moments here is avoid Game Boy Advance Contra 3. That game is garbage. It might look and sound more like the SNES game, but this one plays a lot better and is a lot more fun. I'll show you why someday. You may see that one end up in complete trash, instead of how about that like this. Another thing I haven't talked about yet really is the music in this game. While it's not going to win any awards, it's pretty good. A lot of the SNES game's songs are done pretty well and come off respectably. They're all certainly recognizable, and they've included a lot of them. Now this Walker boss thing that we're fighting here, it's sort of a mid-level boss. Its movements and its attacks are cut back a little bit and simplified, but I mean, look at this. They've even got the part where it, opens the wall and slams into you, or tries to. Again, vastly simplified from the SNES game, and as long as you've got the flamethrower, you can just melt this thing. Now, if you come in here with a different weapon that fires individual bullets, and you're only going to hit this thing with 1 or 2 individual bullets at a time, this fight is going to take like 4 to 5 times longer. And this is the one part where the flamethrower is not exactly adequate, because those missiles are random heights, and if you just get the wrong height, you've got to stand there and just blast missiles until you get one that comes in high overhead. Otherwise you can't safely make that jump. And here's one, because of the range, you may be tempted to get something like the spread gun or the homing rockets, but it's not worth it. Just hang on to the flamethrower. Trust me. So the boss of this level, which we'll be coming up to shortly, is really, really simplified. On the Super Nintendo original, there are sort of 2 stages of the boss. We've got the 2 weird skeleton guys that kind of jump out. You got to destroy them. And we've also got the really big guy that breathes fire all over the place after pulling the doors open. Original, in this Game Boy game, we've got the fire guy. That's how it starts, the really big one. They'll open up his door, and he'll start breathing fire all over the screen in a big circle, but we're not even going to see it, because with the flamethrower, Like I said, it melts bosses. He doesn't even get a chance to attack. And then we're on to our next overhead level. So, those of you who know Contra 3 will realize, hey, we're missing a level there. We don't have the one where you're riding things and get to ride along the rockets at the end and all that stuff. That one is cut. I guess they just couldn't really figure out a way to make that work on the Game Boy hardware, in a satisfying way. So this is our second overhead level, and again, it mimics the Super Nintendo original. Not exactly the same. We see some different enemy types and different attacks and things like that. And these little sand swirls, they would force you to rotate when you stepped on them in that version. And of course, in this one, we don't get that. It would have been nice if they would have had you just rotate directions when you stepped on them. But I guess, since you can change direction as soon as you touch the control pad, it wouldn't have really made much sense to do that. And the barriers on this game are next to useless. It just seems like they wear off almost immediately. And, you don't even get a chance to use them and get protected from anything. I feel like this should have lasted like 3 times longer. And I do like very much that Factor 5 decided to keep in the arrows that tell you where the enemy stations are that you've got to destroy. We're already up to the last one here. So yeah, that's much, much easier on Game Boy than the SNES original. And this boss, again, much, much easier. The only thing you've got to watch out for here is if you shoot the spiky balls as they're going around him, they will basically target you and make a beeline for you. If you leave them alone and don't shoot at them and just shoot the eye things, then super easy. The sand makes you move, even if you're standing still, and it makes you move faster if you go in the same direction or slower if you go against it. And anyway, that's the end of level 4, and we're going to get ready to go on to the game's final stage. So again, we have an alien's lair, greatly simplified. I kind of wish they had been able to put a little something into the background. This level, just as it is, looks, a bit unfinished, I think. And then again, flamethrower melts bosses and mini-bosses, so that thing just goes away immediately. If I didn't have it, if I had a regular weapon there, that thing would shoot out little alien embryos, sort of like what you see in the original NES and arcade Contras in its final level. These basically do the same thing. You might get to see a little of it. There's 3 of them in this level, in this version of the game. I think you'll see at least one of them on the last one. Here we've got a familiar boss. This does show up in SNES Contra 3, but this was the final boss in NES Super C, which was its port of Super Contra. Again, flamethrower melt bosses. If you had the spread gun or something, you'd be doing that fight for a good 4 or 5 minutes. Flamethrower, less than 1. And yeah, I don't make use of the bombs very much. I don't remember if I used them at all in this run. When you do use them, they turn the screen, reverse colors, basically. So that's how you know they're being used. They'll kill any regular enemies that are on there and damage, any bosses. So this boss, if you come here without the flamethrower, super, super long time to beat. You've got to destroy the 2 little heads that are kind of like the boss from, Super Contra, and then you've got to destroy the one in the middle there. And without the flamethrower, this takes quite a long time. With the flamethrower, it is negligible. And guess what? That is it. We have defeated Game Boy Contra The Alien Wars. So overall, I've got to say, this game is actually pretty good. It surprised me a lot the first time I played it, because I'm like, Super Nintendo Contra 3, how are they going to get anything even remotely like that on the little black and white Game Boy? Or all-green Game Boy, as it actually was back in the day. Still, they did a pretty nice job. Yes, as I said before, there are many cutbacks. And personally, I wouldn't want to really play this over the Super Nintendo one. But, like I said, I can absolutely see people trying things on this one, getting used to the levels, seeing what it's like, and basically what's coming next for a lot of things. Just so you have a basic idea and then sort of graduating up to the Super Nintendo version afterwards. Now, yeah, that's not going to be a perfect solution because there's a lot of things that were cut from this one, a few other bosses and mini-bosses that I hadn't talked about. But for what is here, they've done a really nice job. And for a tiny little portable game that you could take with you anywhere, back in the early 90s, this was great. So Factor 5 once again did a great job. The only thing that I wasn't super jazzed about in this game really was the music and not being able to have two weapons at the same time. The music, they did their best to work within the limitations here, and you can tell it's very 8-bit European style with all the arpeggio style instruments that are in there. But again, it's not bad. I'm not knocking it. It's pretty good. I just think in some cases it could have been even a little bit better. And Factor 5 really wanted you to know that they made this. Their name is all over this thing. And that's the end of Contra the Alien Wars. Okay, so just a few final thoughts at the end here. Nothing special, we'll make it quick. Contra the Alien Wars for the Game Boy was a good game. Yeah, it came out very late in the system's life and was actually the final 8-bit Contra game ever released for home hardware. And obviously, it was up against a lot of limitations, and for the hardware they had available to them, I think Factor 5 really did an admirable job with this game. It's really good to see, a company put an effort into making something the best they could. Yeah, it would have been nice to see the missing levels and the missing mini-bosses and stuff, and the missing weapons and different enemies for that matter, but considering, again, the limitations of the hardware, they did an excellent job. So Contra the Alien Wars for the Game Boy, I recommend checking it out. So tell me now, did you even know this version of Contra 3 existed? Had you ever seen it before? Now that you've seen it, what do you think? Do you think it's impressive for the hardware, or have I just gone crazy in my old age? Tell me all about it in the comments. And that brings us to the end of another video, my retro gaming friends. That'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss one of my videos. If you want to support the work I do here, you can now do that through YouTube channel memberships or through the usual places like Patreon and Ko-fi. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.